Is it obvious that I'm only wearing this because I didn't want to do my hair this morning, and I remembered last second that I had this, so... because that's exactly why I'm wearing this, because of laziness. I'm also wearing this shirt because it's the closest I have to an actual Punisher shirt. Like, I don't really have, like, the actual, like, skull all black. Like, this is the closest I have to, like, a skull. Besides that, let's just go on. The Punisher is the latest Marvel Netflix series to be released after The Defenders, and this show focuses on Frank Castle after he's tied up every loose end he had from the end of Season 2 of Daredevil. He's now just trying to live a quiet life on his own by himself, but he runs into this man named David Lieberman named Micro, who faked his death a long time ago. He's been hiding out in this basement somewhere, hiding from the government, and they find out that they both have a common goal in taking down a man named Rollins, a government official who has both done them wrong before. For Frank, it was during his military career, and so they're trying to work towards that. And you also have an old friend of Frank's from the military, Billy Russo, who is working with Rollins heading this new organization. He's a pretty wealthy guy, but of course he's pretty dirty now. So you have conflict there, but you also have conflict in the DHS agents Stein and Madani, who are trying to solve this case. And while they're doing that, they run into a bit of evidence that may lead them to believe that the Punisher is still out there. And I was really excited for this show because The Punisher in Daredevil Season 2 was fantastic. Jon Bernthal did an excellent job, so I couldn't wait to see what they were going to do with him with his own show, because nowadays especially there's so many different ways that you could play this guy up. And obviously the best part about this show is the continuing performance of Jon Bernthal. Jon Bernthal knocked this performance out of the park with this show. He is excellent. He's really the only guy who can play the Punisher seriously at this point, because at this point it's kind of a meme when you hear the that Jon Bernthal makes when he's like really angry as the Punisher. But in the show, and understanding who the Punisher is as a character in context with everything else, it actually kind of works for the anger that the Punisher has inside of him, that he's storing up, that the only thing in certain moments that he can really release is just this loud, agitated yell. So at first it's kind of ridiculous, but once you kind of understand the context of the character and where the scream is kind of coming from, it just fits perfectly. And I like how they try to explore the effects of PTSD that they have on the Punisher, because he's having flashbacks of his family. He misses his wife and kids, and he's constantly struggling through that, even now after Season 2 of Daredevil. And it's just something that was so intriguing to see how PTSD can affect a lot of military people. Not just the fictional Frank Castle, they focus on other people with PTSD from the military. Mainly explored when they have scenes with Frank's friend Curtis, who runs like this circle group where military people come in and they talk about like what they're feeling and all that, which is a very good contrast to Frank's character, who always wants to be on his own, and Curtis always reaching out to him. But also at these support groups you meet this character named Lewis, who is a very young vet. He's very young, but the PTSD has really affected him in a lot of ways and leads him down a very complex and interesting path. It really does illustrate the different effects that PTSD has, because I think maybe some people will think, oh, PTSD, that means like a military guy will like cry for like 5 minutes or something like that, but it actually can have different tolls on people as well. Some people won't get it, but then there's some people who will get PTSD, but they'll have different effects going on with them. And it was just very interesting to see a show like this, a show based off a comic book, actually explore that, which is another thing I really loved, is that this is the most down-to-earth you can really get with a comic book Netflix series right now, especially compared to Daredevil, who, he has powers, he's blind but can see, so, and he also can fight extremely well, the best martial arts skills on Netflix. Luke Cage has powers, his skin is unbreakable, Iron Fist, his fist glows up, and he can do all the iron fisting that he wants, and Jessica Jones also has some super strength. The Punisher is literally just a guy. He's from the military and he's been trained in that way, but he is, at the end of the day, still a guy. You put him next to Daredevil or Jessica Jones or a Luke Cage, and clearly they have the superhero powers, while he is just the average guy superhero, the actual down-to-earth one. seeing them actually finally do something like that is so good, because there is no, like, plot reveal like, oh, we like, stuck in some DNA into you, you had powers all along. There's none of that going on here. He is literally just one of the best at what he does when it comes to violence and shooting guns and killing people. He's just one of the best at it. He's got so much anger inside of him too that also kind of builds up. It's not superpowers giving him this great militaristic mind of his. I also really liked how they didn't really politicize the Punisher as a character, because there are certain scenes in this show that will talk about gun control, especially during this political climate. It is a touchy subject, to say the least, but I think they handled it appropriately, where they don't really take a side, they just kind of voice both sides' opinions, so they don't really alienate a group of people, you know what I mean? Like, they present both arguments, but they don't really, like, pick an answer, you know? So I think that was a wise choice on their behalf. And it also really gets you invested into the show as well, knowing that there really isn't a whole lot of superhero stuff going on. Sure, Karen Page from Daredevil shows up a few times, but it isn't just to reference Daredevil, like she's there for Frank Castle. It also really gets you invested in the scenes that he has with Micro. David Lieberman's character, I was a little worried at first because he's a hacker, and it seems like that he and Frank Castle, they have opposite personalities, so I was a little worried that maybe he was going to get annoying, especially when it comes down to, oh, they have to bring him out into the field, but, oh, he's, like, scared of violence or something like that. The conversations that these two have are actually really good character-building stuff. Like, there's really one scene especially where they're a little drunk, and they're talking to each other, like, casually, in the drunk casually, and it's really heartwarming to see these two kind of opposite people just get along and kind of just put aside their differences for a second and get to understand each other a little bit more. And that's another thing they do as well. They can bicker, they have arguments, but at the same time they understand each other. They know mentally, like, what their motivations are, especially when it comes to Micro wanting to send Frank Castle to his family who he left behind in order for their safety. He sends Frank over to check on them because he's the only one who can. And I was a little worried that his family was going to get on my nerves, like, oh, don't cut to this family. But then, after a while, I was thinking, you know, I'm really interested to see what's going on with the family. I want to know what's going on with the Liebermans. And so whenever Frank went over there's just more interesting character moments going on. This will lead to a lot of people's problems with the show, though, because if you check Rotten Tomatoes, no surprise, it has like a 61% currently. It's like one of the lowest rated Netflix shows, and I'm not really on the same page, but I can see where they're coming from, because this show is slow. Like, it is not just like John Wick style action every 5 seconds. It is a slow building show, and while you will get some incredible action sequences, like, they are amazing. The action in this show is some of the best that they've done in any of the Marvel Netflix stuff, especially a fight scene with Frank Castle, and he's all alone, and you have military guys coming in trying to take him out, and he's just, yeah, you obviously kind of know what to expect, but it's just incredible stuff. And not just that, but literally any other action scene is just incredible due to how they use the Punisher's skill set. But of course, whenever those action scenes show up, they're amazing and they're violent. The first episode ends on an incredible sequence that is honestly the greatest way to start out the series, with that action scene. But the show also takes its time to slow down and actually get you invested with the character. They want you to get to know him more. They want you to understand him better. They don't want you to look at him as just, oh, look, it's the guy who kills people really well. They want you to see him as a real person. And I think the slow build was actually really worth it in that regard. A lot of people might be turned off by that slow build, though. I can understand that. But just for me, like on my own, I really did enjoy how they utilized the slow build in this show. The only real times I actually ever felt just the pace of the show just kind of slog down, like, I really wish this wasn't 13 episodes, is mostly the Stein and Madani stuff. Now, Madani is fine for me. Like, after a while, after a few episodes, I was like, okay, I can see where this character is going, not too bad. It's more so Stein that kind of gets on my nerves, because he's, I guess, the comedic relief, and he's not that funny. He's just kind of there. Like, his first scene is literally just to spout out expositional dialogue, like, oh, I see, you had the big office here, you're the big top shot, while I'm off in the corner over there. It's like, oh, come on, dude. That's some pretty obvious exposition. But once they get more focused on the Madani stuff instead of just her and Stein, I think that's where it actually gets pretty good, and eventually she does lead into the bigger theme of the whole series, which is good. But for a while, though, it just felt like they kept cutting back to these two, and they had nothing new to do. It's just the same old argument, the same old conversations. And it just made me think, like, this doesn't really need to be 13 episodes at this point. You could have cut it down to, like, Defenders' length of 8 episodes, and maybe we could have been a little better as far as that pace goes with the DHS agents. Luckily, they aren't the main focus, but they do take up a lot of story time. I've been a little disappointed, though, because recently with Marvel Netflix, the villains have been letting me down, like the one in Iron Fist I didn't like. Defenders let me down with Sigourney Weaver, but this show, I think Ben Barnes actually did a pretty good job as Billy Russo, especially with how they wrote the character. We're back to the basics of he's just not a bad guy because he is a bad guy. He is troubled. He is like Frank, a PTSD, has messed with his mind a little bit too, and even though he is this really successful, more rich kind of guy, he's still not completely satisfied and wants more out of life. But at the same time, you can feel this relationship that he still wants to have with Frank Castle, their old war buddies, so there's also that kind of drama as well. I think that it was really wise of them to do that, and I'm just glad that Billy Russo just wasn't this guy who was like, I used to be a friend of Frank's, but now all I care about is power. Like, that would have been terrible. I'm glad they didn't do that. And even Rollins, I didn't mind. He is a little bit more of the power-hungry type than Billy Russo, but he has a couple good monologues, and there's one portion near the end of the series where he gets insane, and I was like, okay, you're freaking me out a bit. So I was very pleased with what they did with the villains of this show, but by far the best part about this series is the overall character arc that Frank Castle has. Like, you see him from Daredevil Season 2, you carry off with the beginning of this show, and where he ends up in the finale. Like, that was a really powerful kind of ending to see where his character kind of goes. No spoilers, of course, but just seeing where they kind of leave it off was just, it was perfect. It was really beautifully perfect, the way they treated his character. And that's one of the main reasons why I really adore this season of The Punisher, and I wish there would make a Season 2, maybe have him cameo in another Netflix show, Daredevil Season 3, I don't know, because they really did the character right. I feel like they did an excellent job writing him and fleshing him out even more so in this show. His scenes with Micro are really good, the overall story was really intriguing. Besides a lot of repetition with the DHS stuff, Madani actually kind of stood out after a while, and also the villains worked very well. There's some great writing here, some amazing action sequences, a lot of great direction when it comes to that. This show is really great. I think I enjoyed it a lot more than a lot of other people did, because you have some people, of course, that bleed into that 61% on Rotten Tomatoes, and I'd actually go a little bit higher on that end, because I really did like this show. I'm gonna give The Punisher an A-. If you haven't checked it out yet, I would suggest you do it right away, because it is actually a really interesting take on The Punisher. They could have gone with the, let's have an action scene like every 5 minutes of this series, but they didn't. They took their time to flesh out a lot of the psychological torment that is going on with Frank Castle, and how that kind of builds into what he does in the action scenes. And I think overall, that's what made the best show possible. But if you've already binged The Punisher, leave in the comments below what you thought of it, because I know I'm pretty late on this. I'm also going to be late on several other reviews that I'm going to be doing before I make my top best and worst videos, which will come after Christmas, somewhere before New Year's, of course. There's going to be probably an influx of reviews, because I just want to catch up for you guys. I have more movies that I would like to talk about, so look out for those, and as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.